Welcome back, Sarah.
Thank you for having me, Miriam.
I am looking forward to this conversation. The last time we spoke, we just recapped before hitting the record button was just when the pandemic hit in Europe, beginning of the lockdown.
Yes, indeed. I think I remember so vividly. It was the March of 2020. The Netherlands just went into lockdown. And if you would listen to that podcast really closely, you will actually hear my voice going up and down. Not just because of the nervousness of, oh, I'm on the podcast talking about something that's important to me or feels important to me, but also like, what is this time that I'm living in? The lockdown, the remote facilitation, figuring things out, finding the best spots of Wi Fi in the house while talking to you. The rest of the household is also trying to have the best Wi Fi connection. So, yeah, it feels like another life.
Yeah. And in the meantime, we have collaborated
Yes.
online, never done before has happened. And you have, yeah, maybe redefined yourself what facilitation means to you, maybe not. And I would be very curious to just hear from you. 2 years of remote facilitation. What has emerged? What has changed? What makes workshops work?
Yeah, great question. Last time, I think the essence for me in that podcast was that facilitators activate the wisdom in the room. And I think the extra layer of remote facilitation because of the pandemic is that facilitators not only activate the wisdom of the group, but facilitators need to ground themselves and therefore the participant in the group as well in order to reach that source of wisdom. Because the pandemic, we have been thrown off whatever path we were on. If I remember correctly, in a way, because pandemic also mess up your mind in a way, your memory. But I remember the first period that a lot of facilitators, entrepreneurs, or just people in general, like try to do the same thing, but just in a different channel.
Mm.
Let me just convert all my content online. Let me just try to figure this out. And for me, the biggest learning within these 2 years now, and also the remote facilitation, is really to recognize the channel you choose for the limitation, but also the opportunities it has. And what I use for metaphor is like, if you go to the theater or go to the movies or watch Netflix at home, those are three very different experiences. And then with those experiences, there are certain expectations of atmosphere in a way. And some of them you can kind of like translate, but some of them you just can't recreate. And by having that mindset of, oh, I wish this was in person, or I wish this was, you're actually missing out. And therefore, you're not really in it,
Mm.
really experiencing what this has to offer. So, in a way, that resentment of the moment can be multiplied as well by the resentment that's going on in the system or globally. And that is an obstacle in getting what we're trying to achieve.
This makes a lot of sense. And I wonder whether what I hear is that it starts as an inner game that we have to accept and to find the right channel for the right medium for the experience we want to create. And only if we accept that, okay, it is as it is, these are the limitations, then also our groups will accept it. And then to come back to something that you just said earlier, is the grounding. So how do you actually then help these groups to ground in order to do the work in the session? Because I think one obstacle or one challenge is the multiple distractions when we facilitate online. So how does it all come together?
For me, there were two things within this pandemic that really inspired me and contributed to my learning. So one of the things that I did was a course that called Bringing Aliveness Online. And there was taught by two great facilitators. They've been doing this since the 70s and, by phone and everything. And they said that within facilitation or holding the space, it's kind of like instead of dictating, it's just pointing out the way and let things emerge. And I translate that in grounding in terms of, so one of the things I often say when we do remote facilitation is that even though we're popping in from different windows, we are sharing this virtual space together. And this virtual space actually has magical doors and walls. And those walls are made out of three ingredients. So one is just the technology, the electricity and the Wi-Fi. If that's out, then we're out. But that's not just it, because within the thin doors, you would say, you have the isolation materials to keep the wall, like the three little piggies, like that's it's solid. So the isolation material is made out of one, tone of voice, the choice of words, also in the chat, because when you're remote facilitating, you can do the thing in the room, but there can be another discussion going on in the chat, and you can't figure, and people, and especially because the chat, it's just like email, you don't hear it, so maybe you're thinking, hey, you're attacking me or whatever, and just to be aware of that. What is your tone of voice, and what is your choice of words? And the other one, the isolation material, is your attention. Of course, there's life, maybe someone knock on the door, you and the postman, or you need some water, and that's okay. But if everybody's doing that, then there's no isolation material. So I think the facilitator has the position of power to point out a way at the beginning of the session, during the session, and also when shit hits the fan. When someone dropped this comment in the chat, that you can just like go back to, hey, I'm seeing this, and just noticing it. Because I think the grounding for me, and that's the other learning as well, is this polyvagal theory when it comes to our nervous system. And that in order to stay engaged, there's actually a lot of information that we're getting from your face. And that's perfect when it comes to remote facilitation, because all we're seeing is the upper part. And there are a lot of things that we can use. So sometimes people who are hearing this cannot see it, but sometimes when you come in the room, you can see people like this. You'll see only the ceiling, or maybe the facilitator is looking like this, kind of down on you, and you immediately have this reaction. And just to be aware of that, how is my body language, just like you would in front of the room, and to, in a way, send out this energy of you're welcome. And we are looking forward to whatever you have to bring here or not to bring here. And that's okay.
And I would be curious how you might adjust your own energy to the group, or is it always the same, Sarah? Especially when you speak about the language, when you speak about, I know that you're using a lot of music in your facilitation and sessions. How do you choose which Sarah comes out of the closet to host this? Is it in advance, or do you adjust to the energy that the group sends you?
Yeah, for me, it really is like riding a car. It depends on the road. It depends on how crowded it is. It depends on the other cars as well. And I love the question of which Sarah because there's a multitude of Sarahs. And I think for me, especially within the remote facilitation, is the advantage of being in your own environment in a way. So that helps me ground as well. But also to, because of that groundedness, being able to sense what is needed in the group. So I think also even on site facilitation, when there's a lot of playfulness in the group, more seriousness of me would come out, the need for structure. Or if there's a lot of structure and people like, okay, task oriented, we just want to go there, I would add a little bit more playfulness.
This is very interesting. And would you do this consciously, or is it something that you've trained, or is it instinct? Because when I think of myself, my instinct would be to mirror the group. So if there's a light group and playfulness, then most probably the light, playful Miriam would come out, still providing structure because that's what the group needs. But I think it sounds like a challenge to really provide this complement.
Well, for me, if it's a matter of timing, because if the group is very playful and I come in very serious, then there's also this rejection of, oh, you're not like us, you're very different. So there's this point of almost, I wouldn't say merging, it's like attuned to the group. So because as a facilitator, you're also being organized by the group psychology. So whenever I notice, oh, I'm actually being more playful, and it could go both ways. It could go the way of, oh, I'm actually more playful than I normally am. That could be that the group is too serious. So I'm kind of like being projected in the playfulness, like, oh, you know what, Sarah, you just perform for us. You can perform, and then we can just watch you, and we
It's
don't have to do
entertainment.
anything. Yes, it's like being on the stage. Or it could be that the group is I'm playful, and there's this part of I'm trying to fit in the group because I'm afraid that I otherwise will be rejected. It could also be when I'm like, hey, I'm acting out in a way of I'm maybe dropping names. I'm dropping the, oh, this is the kind of important stuff that I've done. I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Is there like this systemic isms within the group that is putting a part of me down? So therefore, I'm feeling the urge to prove myself.
Sounds like
So
ego.
yes, ego, but also I think in facilitation, it's not just about the group, it's often about the structure that the group is in. And as a facilitator, you're working on different layers. You're working on the interpersonal relationship, but you're also seeing how is that interpersonal relationship being influenced by the organizational structure within the organization, but also maybe by societal structures, and bring all these layers in, making people realize that it's not just them in a way, the individual, it's the system, and the system is manifesting itself through the individual. So by being an individual, doing a little thing differently, they're also influencing the system.
Lots to disentangle.
I can imagine bring a lot in.
Because the starting point was the facilitator and how the facilitator adjusts to the group, right?
Yeah.
So can be the compliment, can be the fitting in, can be the need to prove myself, ego driven. And if I understand you correctly, all these reactions to the group are not only related to our own feelings and beings and insecurities, but also triggered by the group and the system or the dynamics of the group that they're in. So how would you very practically prepare for something? Is it that you want to learn about the group and potential dynamics beforehand? Or is it rather important to be grounded at the beginning so that you can trust that however you're going to react and whatever Sara will come out, it will be the right Sara in the right moment?
So let me give a little bit context here because of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, I've moved more into, let's say, heated discussions. So when it comes to conflict transformation, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, from the summer of 2020 till just around, let's say, the spring of 2021, I've done a lot of online facilitation when it comes to digesting emotions when it comes to Black Lives Matter. So that is the context. So a practical example that I talked before was also, there was this one session. It was in Zoom, luckily, because I've done them before in MS Teams as well with no breakout rooms and 90 people. That was horrible with directors and managers and people, just on the work floor talking about psychological safety. But this was a session of that one team and talking about, the title was literally That's Talk. So you could say it was about experiencing safety in this strange time. And I started introducing myself as a facilitator, as someone who is the designated facilitator to guide this discussion, that the stories or the perspectives are in the room. We're just here to listen. And there was this silence within the room. And especially online, even 30 seconds of silence feels very long. And there were about 25 of them. So one of the things I do is, when there's a lot of closeness in a group, I often start sharing myself, because when I show vulnerability, that's modeling in a position of power, then others might able to share. So I started to share my story of my background of being a person of color, working in a lot of mostly predominantly white environment, that I'm also married to a white man. And then, boom, this guy, he was like cutting me off. And he was like, you know what? It doesn't matter. I really don't want to hear your story. Da, 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 da.
Wow.
And yes, you could hear not only the silence, the room kind of went ice cube in a way. And I had such a bodily reaction. I felt my throat tightening. I felt my heart racing. And I was trembling in a way. And then I pinned his video. That's what you can do with remote facilitation. And while he was ranting, I was just looking at him and thinking to myself, this is also another human being with his own stories. How can I connect to him? And then after his ranting, I said, with my trembling voice, because I was still having these reactions, and I said, if we're here to hear each other's stories, it could be times that we hear things that might seem untrue to us, because those are not our experiences. But by hijacking the space, we're not giving space to others to tell their story. And also, I'm realizing now that I'm in a position of power, that you're maybe thinking that I did not give you space to say or tell your story. And if that is the case, I truly apologize. And I wonder how to go from here. And another 10 seconds of silence, which was very long. And then another woman of color came in and said, well, actually, I really want to hear your story. So it's like opening up. So come back to what we talked about earlier. It's about me being in the heat of things. And instead of having all kinds of methods like, okay, how do I deal with this destructive participant? Or how can I shut him up? How can I, whatever tips or advice there are, it's really first to connect to myself, acknowledging what I'm feeling, but also acknowledging the power that I'm holding to cultivate a better environment for everyone. Because we all hijack the space when we are feeling threatened in some ways. And it happens to the best of us. Never think, oh, but the intent and the impact, I meant well. Well, you can mean well and stand on my toes and it still hurts. To really own that piece. And that is what I come to realize within this pandemic of the 3 R's, of being resilient, owning my mistakes, but then bounce from that, to favor the relationships instead of whatever needs to be solved. And that's me by looking at this guy thinking, okay, I'm feeling stepped over, I'm feeling a lot of things, but you're another human being as well. And then taking my part of the responsibility to either apologize, to do something, because it's not just this spiritual or umbaya, we all want to be there, but really to take the responsibility to do whatever is needed. So we all have space to contribute whatever wisdom is in the room.
Thank you for the example and walking us through. I think that's really, really powerful. And I could feel you in this situation and how triggered you must have felt. Yeah. And then to have the reaction or the instinct to pin him for yourself. Yeah. So just to avoid any misunderstandings in the audience, it's not spotlighting. So it's not putting him on big picture to everyone. It's just for yourself. Yeah. To connect with him. And I think that's very, very courageous, because I would expect the normal reaction to be, okay, hiding. I don't want to see him because it's a threat. I feel threatened. And if the lion shows up, I don't want to have him even in bigger size. I want him to be very small. Go away, tiger. And then to empathize, to find the compassion, and still displaying the authority. And I think this is a very thin line. How do you draw the line that, okay, this is my space of power. This is where I have authority. So I am allowed, and I give myself permission to share my story. And I also give you permission to share yours.
And that's for me really, don't get me wrong, some people are just assholes, men or women. But it really is, and that's why the polyvagal theory is so important for me. Like when I'm in that flight or fight or fawn, or in that immobilized freeze that I don't know what to do, is that the situation there in this room? So that really has to do with my resilience, of my groundedness. And when it really is harming, and not just to me, but to the group, I have the power to call things out and call things in as well. And then by doing that, moving the group into a safer visceral state of connection. Because when it comes to collaboration, we need to feel connected to each other, but mostly to ourselves. And then that comes back to the virtual walls of being present, of when I can truly be here and I can see you as another human being with your own stories. I can tell you when things are not okay, what you're doing, but also not accepting whatever crap you're putting on me, because that's your crap. It's not my crap. And I can say it in a playful way. Maybe when it's needed, I can say it in a very serious way. And I can say it from a grounded space. And that for me is power, because I am not a victim of your power over. I have my own freedom and my own agency to communicate and collaborate with you, but on the terms that I think is needed right now. And that for me really is the power of facilitation, of with the collective shaping a different narrative of how we want to function and envision a better future together.
Yeah. And I think it was very powerful then also that this lady actually took action and basically stood beside you and said, actually, I want to hear your story.
Yes.
Which then gives you back permission and says, okay, we heard you, other dude. Let's get back into the rhythm. And I'm curious in two things. So you said you called it out. So you addressed him and his behavior. And then what I understand is you called it in by allowing others to share their opinion, like giving this lady permission to say, actually, I do want to hear your story. Would you then, as a next step, give them the opportunity to share in a large group, or how would you use then, thinking back of what you said earlier, that luckily this session happened on Zoom and not on MS Teams like an earlier one? I would be very curious to hear from you. What was the difference then? What was it that you could do in Zoom? And how did you solve the situation in Teams where you couldn't have breakouts?
So it's not a plug because I'm not getting paid for this, but I think from the early days, the option to have breakout rooms in Zoom, that was a big thing, because we all have different communication styles, and some people just share more easily in the smaller groups than. And also in the beginning, they were like Zoom meetings, 120, 150, 300 people. How are you going to share in a room with 300 people? But when the first session that I did on MS Teams with another facilitator and also with an artist, and we already sensed that this is going to be a very important session, because these people haven't seen each other because of the pandemic for almost, let's say, almost 6 months or so. They've been having meetings on MS Teams, and then we knew that breakout rooms was not possible for 90 people. Back in the days, you had to have different links, and that was just too much for the 90-minute session. But we really wanted to bring in the different layers, not only in the person of, because power has different dimensions. So me, for example, let's say I'm a book nerd, I'm an entrepreneur, I am a woman, I am Taiwanese, I have all these different layers. So we check in already with a split question in a way of, okay, so put in the chat, where are you calling from? That's the name of the place. And where does your heart yearn to be? So you have the different spaces. Maybe, oh, I'm calling you from Amsterdam, but I wish I was in Venice or whatever. And I frame it as, so we already have the difference in us. And then we use the Google form, because the thing with chat in MS Teams is you can see your name and your answer. For a question, a chat check-in, like, where are you calling from? That's fine. But if I would ask a question of, do you feel safe talking about Black Lives Matter on the work floor, and you will have your name attached to it with your manager and your director in the room, that does not feel safe. So we use the Google form to have anonymous input, and then just to share screen and let them see, like, these are the flavors. These are the ratings or the things that are coming in. And then we had the artist who were just like a fly on the wall. So she did different drawings of the different things that people said. We also asked the two managers, who were both male, but one was white and one was black, to identified black and identified whites, to talk about their experience. Because in a group, in an organization, people look at the leaders. I love what Julie Diamond always says, leaders bring the weather. So immediately when the leaders are in the room, you're like, oh, is it sunny? Is it shining? Is whatever. And by then opening up their stories, we can ask other people to share. And always framing of like, okay, we're very grateful that people shared. And we're also acknowledging that this might be too much right now. And that even though you're not voicing what you're thinking, it does not mean that you're disengaged. And please have or feel the space to discuss it with your colleagues, with someone you trust after this call. So I think, Amy Edmonton talked about the psychological safety, but she also wrote another article with, I think his name is, if I pronounce it right, Thijs Bejeu, about voice and silence in workplace conversations. And that she and he mentioned about the psychological safety and the role of leaders to really emphasize that silence does not mean disengaged. Silence is the time that we need to process information. And at the same time, we need people to come in with productive voice of adding things instead of dismissing, like, oh, this is what I want to say, because that is hijacking the space. But to really challenge the assumption that's in the room of, yeah, that is very interesting perspective. And what I would like to add is, so it's a healthy mix of advocacy and inquiry. And then for me, the underlying meta skill is always this holding space of everything that's here is welcome, and the pointing out the way of, by doing things like this, we're harming things that are important to us.
And let me dig a bit deeper here. When you say everything is welcome, and then there are behaviors that are not welcome, very clearly. So it is not welcome for anyone voicing their anger or insulting someone, showing disrespect. So where do you, and there are two questions, where do you draw the line and how do you react to that? So to say, on the first, saying everything is welcome. Oh, wait a moment, but not you, and you neither. And then what is your responsibility as a facilitator, having triggered this reaction or not?
Everything is welcome, but not every behavior is okay. And I think we all have a basic sense of what kind of behavior is not okay. I had an example of someone stepping on my toe. And I do think, at least speaking from my personal experience, is that I try to approach things that everybody mean well, but they're not always aware. So when I point things out so another example was I was coaching a team, and there were, this team was 40 people, but I was more closely to this team of 8. And I tried to bring in more fun in this very task-oriented team. So I started with something simple of, let's do a different check-in every week when we have those team meetings. And one of the team check-in was very playful. So it was about embodiment, it was about movement, it was only 5 minutes. And then, well, unfortunately, another guy, I'm sorry, somehow my example mostly involving guys. I do have women hijacking space as well. But he said bluntly, and also with his body language, like here in the camera, like, oh, you know what, this is just kindergarten. This is so stupid. I'm not going to do this. And I did an invitation at the beginning, like, we're just trying things out. If you don't want to participate, it's also fine. But it was a very sharp voice, a sharp tone. And I said to him, you know what? You're entitled to your opinion. And at the same time, I'm noticing this very sharp voice, a tone in your voice. And I'm wondering what that does to the group. Could it be that when we address each other with that kind of tone, that some of us might feel some hesitation to come in? So again, pointing out the way of what is the effect, what is the impact of this behavior? And of course, this was a one-time thing. So one of my foundation, you would say, in facilitation is the deep democracy of the process work. And that is that everything in the group is needed, like alchemy. Some things, you have to stir it slowly and adding all funky, strange things, and then it will turn gold by magic in a way. So sometimes you're putting things in, you're like, why am I putting this in? And that for me is like a group relations, group process. But at the same time, if you have too much weird things, maybe you will never turn gold. So it's also time to say, whoa, stop. We have enough dead frogs or whatever, we don't need those dried frogs anymore. But not by the first one already. So if there's a sharp voice like, no, we don't do sharp here. Like, no, actually in the group, sometimes we need some sharpness. It's just like what Adam Kane talked about, the power and the love, that you need both. So for me, it's about the balance. And then comes back to the resilience, not only from the facilitator, but also from the group. What is our resilience for things that might seem a little bit out of there? And can we add just a little bit of that thing that we don't want here? And not as an annoyance, but as something that we maybe can use.
A learning opportunity.
Definitely a learning opportunity. And then it all comes down to the groundedness. Because when we do not physically feel safe, we go to the attack.
Yeah.
And that can be the outside or even the inside. Like, oh, you know what? I'm worthless. I cannot do this. I'm feeling shame. I'm feeling fear. I'm literally eating myself up. But when I'm eating myself up from the inside, or I'm attacking someone from the outside, I'm not being productive.
Thank you. Very interesting example. How did he react?
I think he was. It was very very street because we spent about half a year together, and he has always been. He was challenging me in many ways. But I think I showered the team with love as well. I think I'm a kind of like a strange team coach. I literally, after those 6 months, asked everyone if you would like feedback from me personally, please give me permission and send me your home address. I seek out presents for everyone within that team who sent me their home address. And I wrote down my individual feedback for every one of them. And he reacted like, you know what? I haven't always been your best friend, but I really recognize you in your professional qualities, and I really appreciate how you showed up in the space. So yeah, I think I won him over eventually. And one of my farewell gift in a way for this team was an online game. And even before that game, he rang me up. He said, "Oh no, not another kindergarten kind of stuff. Sarah, why are you doing this?" And I said to him, "You know what? Just wait and see. I promise you, if you, after the session, which was about 2 hours or so, still think it's kindergarten, I'm gonna treat you something." And it was hard. It was totally hard. They had to solve a puzzle online without showing the puzzle pieces to each other.
Right?
Yes. So the game was all about communication, collaboration, but also making a plan instead of using the MS Teams like to think about the channels. Oh, so we cannot show the puzzle pieces to each other, but can we use something like a Google Jam? Or because Miro board was, because of the restrictions within the organization, not possible. Or can we use some other kind of resources to let the information cross over? Because otherwise it's just words in this virtual space. And what do we have? So by playing that game, something really clicked for them, like what is the behavior, but most importantly, what is the pattern that we're showing as a group, and the resentment that we're feeling, not only against each other, but also because of this whole pandemic, because their frustrations as a team has been, we haven't really we haven't really met each other, and now we do is just meet. First they use Skype for Business, that's even worse, and then they switch to MS Teams. But how do you do this? So that it was actually a lot of feeling that the power is slipping between your fingers in a way, of the things that you used to do, you don't know how to do it. So then you become this, you would even say, less nice version of yourself online, and not aware of it, the impact that you're having by behaving this way. So I think in summary, a lot of things I do, I would say on site, but even more online, is to bring the human back in the space of our cravings for connections, for collaborations, for having creative conflicts, not harmful conflicts, but creative conflict to have greater things emerge, and to really utilize this virtual space in a way that is serve us, and not us working frantically like, oh, I can't get this mural to work, but really to see the possibilities, and then from that grounded, resilient place, to take our responsibilities, to honor the relationships, and to move things to a better place.
In talking about moving things to a better place, what is it from the 2 years of remote facilitation learnings that you would like to move to to the next phase of whatever the future facilitation looks like for you?
Ooh. Um, that's a big question. I think one of the things I've been doing in the last year is really this belonging in the virtual space, of those different elements that we can pay attention to cultivate those conditions that will enhance people's sense of belonging. So I think the next stage for me in terms of remote facilitation is really to continuously craft and design those transformational spaces, for people to not only feel their sense of belonging, but to shape their own sense of belonging. Because that's not, I think belonging is just like human beings, such a multi-layered concept that it's not fixed in a way. So yeah, to bring those.
Do you mean that it's a feeling that just is, so it's difficult to put a label on it, or what do you mean?
So for me, belonging is just like power. It's dependent on the context. It's dependent on the situation, and it's even depending on my needs. Just look myself. I am a part of different communities, also online, and I can, just like the different Sarahs, I can have my needs met in different communities. But by recognizing what my own needs are, instead of I got to find this one community that's just kind of tick all the boxes, like finding this romantic life partner, and I'm just gonna have everything from this one thing. Recognizing that because of remote facilitation, there are so many things that we can do. And by recognizing that, I let go of the idea that there's only one way of doing things, of only one way of achieving, but I can more go with the flow and enjoy when I'm using the WebEx and all 300 participants are on mute and not on camera, but just enjoying that moment and seeing how can I connect here. And how can I be of service here? How can I be human here? So everyone get to bring their best part.
And this is something that you learned throughout the 2 years.
Yes, and the learning really started with, I had such a visceral feeling of entering different spaces online, this Zoom link or MS link or Google Hangout or whatever. I've done them all. And in some spaces, I felt immediately seen and heard, and I could contribute. And in some spaces, I could just feel myself like shrinking and peeling away.
What makes the difference?
The tone. It's always the tone. It has a lot to do with the meta skills of the one holding the space. One of the facilitators I work with, April Jefferson, she's a master in facilitation. She talks about facilitating from the back of the room, of the things that you never see, and maybe not even consciously register, but they were there. So indeed, that's the music. That's the engagement that you're building within the session. That's the seeing what's there of, oh, I see someone has their hand up. Oh, I see this thing in the chat. Oh, and even, oh, I saw that you unmuted yourself for a tiny second. Do you wanted to say something? And also recognizing, especially online, never host alone, because there's just too much distractions. You cannot expect from one facilitator to monitor the chat, share the slides, do the mural, sensing the room. You need to share the task.
Mm. What makes workshops fail?
Workshops fail when people are all wishing something else, but never felt the space to voice what we really think.
Which then comes back to what you said earlier of holding the space and grounding and creating thereby the opportunities for everyone to share.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lot.
Is there anything that you wanted to share that we haven't touched upon yet?
No, I think the question that you always ask, like if someone fell asleep after 30 seconds or so, what I want them to remember, that remote facilitation offers a lot of opportunities for human beings to really connect. And the only thing you have to do is to remember to let the tech work for us and not us working for the tech.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that will be the summary of this episode.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I
Thank
think
you.
it's one of those that you might want to listen to twice. Keep some pen and paper at hand.
And have the Tupperwares and then to tuck it in and then have it another time. So yeah, that was a lot. But it was a pleasure talking to you. I love unpacking these geeky, but maybe less mentioned facilitation layers with you. So always a pleasure. Thank
Thank
you.
you.